I apologize for this. So thank you, Gerd, for introducing me and inviting me to this very nice event. Preparing this talk has been very, very difficult for me. I knew I would give a talk with 3 other top international experts, and how should my talk fit into that? Maybe we can show my slides. My background is computer graphics, and in computer graphics, triangles are playing a very important role. And so over the years, I developed a triangular worldview. For me, everything is a triangle. And I will not explain this to you in detail, but visualization is here the triangle. You have the data, then you have a task, then the user, and that defines how you do the visualization and interaction. Or if you want to have a successful research group, that's the P triangle. To have success, you need people, projects, papers, and so on. Everything for me is a triangle. So I was thinking maybe this can help me to define how I can give a talk. I mean, the talk could be better, but, you know, look at the 3 other people, and you have seen the first 2 talks. So that's difficult. It could be worse. I think I can manage, and maybe I will, or I could give a different talk. And when you think about different, well, maybe that's politically correct. It can be incorrect, or it can be acorrect. There are people stupid enough not knowing the difference between incorrect and acorrect. Who of you doesn't know the difference? Self-awareness is the first step for improvement. So I decided to give a different acorrect talk. And as soon as you decide this, things are getting much easier. A usual talk, you have to have a storyline, a red thread, but with a different acorrect talk, no. I mean, I can have discontinuous cuts in my talk. A storyline is something one-dimensional. I could have a story plane, I could have a story volume, a multi-volume, multi-story volume, whatever. So I have a lot of freedom in that. And I could make these cuts, and now I'm doing a cut. Who knows what this is? I'm not asking Thomas Hurt. This is the Netherlands. And it's a nice country. It's very flat. I mean, if you would be a country, why would you be flat? But anyway, the Netherlands is. And it's great. I mean, if you do a depiction of the Netherlands, you hardly get any distortion because it's already flat to begin with. But that's not the story. The story is, if you do a PhD in the Netherlands, like Martin Everts, maybe 10 years ago, a very nice PhD on illustrative rendering, line rendering, basically. But what these people they have to also provide suggestions, propositions. And these propositions are very general, and in many cases don't have anything to do, seemingly, with the topic of the PhD. Orwell was only off by a decade or 2. The second proposition is something about competent people. The third proposition in Netherlands, in Dutch, it talks about if you are too perfect, at some point it will not be recognizable anymore. It's using fractal objects. So there are these propositions that don't have anything to do, seemingly, with the underlying topic. So I thought, well, maybe I could also have propositions for my talk that are general and might not have anything to do, seemingly, with the talk. This is an acorrect talk. If you don't like my propositions, you can leave. I mean, you got a decent lunch for free. And I had a lot of propositions, and I took the 3 least controversial ones. And the one is, women become uglier year after year. The former and future president of the US has been right. And Crimea belongs to Russia. So these are my propositions, and maybe I will come back to that at a later point or not. But now, this is the Visual Computing Trends Symposium, and let's get back a little bit to the topic. And visual computing is a very nice, very broad area. We have heard about that. And it technically, it contains a lot of disciplines like computer graphics, computer vision, a lot of HCI, visualization, virtual and augmented reality, and so on. And this is a very nice, highly relevant area. And let me talk a little bit how visual computing is embedded in science in a way. Nowadays, we are talking very much about digital transformation. And visual computing is playing a key role here. So on the one hand, we have simulation, scientific computing in a way, but increasingly we are taking these physical phenomena or experiments and we are replacing it by a simulation, by our data. So we have a virtual petri dish, so to speak. And Richard Hemming, long time ago, was saying the purpose of computing is insight, not numbers. It's not about that you have here this long list of numbers. You would like to know something about your phenomenon. And in the past, when you had this experiment, you need a microscope. But now that the petri dish is virtualized, you also need something that is virtualizing the microscope, and that's visualization, for example. So you have a virtual microscope on this side. And this is called computational sciences. That's the beneficial combination, replace experiments with a digital model, for example. This is the one, and if you look at all these areas, you just put computational in front of it, and it exists. Computational law, computational sociology, computational linguistics. It's fantastic how this simulation domain has influenced all these fields. And the second area is data science, where data is generated, and all this machine learning is heavily driven by developments in data science. And there's also visual data science. You're taking the data somewhere, and this is now your phenomenon that you are working on, and you try to get a knowledge out of the data, or maybe you try to derive a model or several models, and then you do an exploration and so on. And visual data science, it contains statistics, programming, databases, visualization, and a lot. So these are driving the digital transformation process, and that's a nice time to be. So let's get back to my talk, to my story. I decided for a story triangle. Not a storyline, story plane, a story triangle. And the title was something like Scalable Interactive Visual Analysis. And I would like to give you now some examples in each of these corners, and then I will go on to the future, what the future might be. And the first is about scalable. Scalability has been around a long time to cope with complexity. So if I'm not explaining very much. If you have complex model, and if you zoom out or zoom in, you are changing the size scale. This is a Mycoplasma bacterium, for example. Or you can have also a different type of scaling that is a semantic scaling, a DNA structure. You can take a look at it on various levels, and you can change the representations in a way. So these scalable techniques have been used with big effort, with big advantages for a long time. If you look at the simulation, you have these grid structures, multi-grids, hierarchical data structures in computer graphics, all these trees, for example. In machine learning, how can I cope with that I need so much training data? So basically, it's a key in this digital transformation of society. And the one example is from Tobias. It's actually Tobias Klein, PhD. He is in the audience, and he will judge if I got to know what he was doing. This was the PhD under the supervision of Ivan Viola. And it was about the instant construction of atomistic models. So why is this interesting? There's a big data revolution in biology. These databases, like protein databases, are growing tremendously year after year. And you have very many scales to capture these phenomenon from eukaryotic cells down to individual atoms. And you have very different types of scanning techniques. You can see it. Then you have a light microscope, electron microscopy, cryo, electron tomography, down to X-ray crystallography. But there's a problem. There's a region in here where it's difficult to model the phenomena there. If you start from larger scales, from the micro scale, for example, the resolution is not high enough, and at some point you only get a fuzzy observation. If you start down here with X-ray crystallography, for example, you have a high resolution, but you can only capture one small element. But in between, you have a large structure that is consisting a lot of these individual elements. And that's where Toby is coming into. So here we see an image of an HIV virus. Fuzzily, we see some components like the membrane and so on. We can use computer graphics to segment that, but actually what would be really nice is to populate these larger structures with small elements that we know, but we could not resolve with the imaging technology. And if you zoom in, you might see a subtle change of the color. There are techniques that are tailored to this switching between scales, for example, and then you have the animation and so on. So this is a nice example where the domain experts from the one side, they did some measurements and determined from maybe a compartment model what's the percentage of elements that are in these individual elements. Then they had these small elements, and then they were coming up with a recipe. And this recipe was telling how much I can populate with these models, my larger model, and then they end up with this model here. This takes very long time. And the idea was then that it would be great to have a computer graphics model in real time, and that you could do the modeling also in real time. So on the left side, that's what the domain experts have been doing, structural biology. On the right side, that's computer graphics, scientific visualization. But the PhD of Toby is the instant construction visualization. That takes also the modeling step into account. And if you want to if you change the recipe or if you have new knowledge, you immediately can change that. And the general strategy is here, compute instead of store. And that's what we will come across at several other places. If you would model your system and have the final model, it might be very much pretty soon outdated. To help with that, you have this recipe, and the recipe is tailored to the new knowledge that is coming along. So he had basically 4 contributions. How can you model a long DNA strand? We came along with a parallel approach how to do that. Then this membrane is a 2D structure. It has to be populated with lipids, but it should not be repetitive. So this is like Wang tiling from texture mapping, for example. In the inside, you had soluble proteins. You had to fill it in parallel, but then you have an overlap. How can you get rid of the overlap? And so on. And maybe even later you manage to get the animation going. I cannot go into the detail. I will show you just a 30 seconds preview with sound.
We present a novel approach to integrative structural modeling of the biological mesoscale. The creation of these types of models has previously been a laborious process, forming a bottleneck in study. Our approach unites the modeling and visualization aspect of the problem. With the ability to create interactive models, domain experts are now able to tune parameters and explore the mesoscale properties that emerge.
All right, so this was an example how to cope with scalability on various levels, and in this case, how can we do the modeling, taking various information into account. Also, Marie-Paul was talking about that, putting several sources of information together. I will come back to that later on. So, okay, this was the example of scalability. The next one is interactive. Well, the extreme case of being interactive is no interaction at all. So on the one hand, if you do scientific visualization, you have a lot of interaction. On the other side, maybe you have a video, a movie with no interaction. In between, maybe it's a guided interaction, augmented interaction, you are showing labels, and so on. So I want to give you an example that is, and this is also an area where people are talking about storytelling, having a narrative. And that's, sorry, my next example. This is part of the PhD of David Koschril. I think he's also in the room. And we'll check how far away I am with the explanation. And it's a molecumentary. And what is this about? The idea is, sometimes in science, we're doing an investigation, we have an interaction with the model, and then we have to show it to laypersons or non-experts. And then the real-time rendering or the animation is not enough by itself. It would require additional labels, additional information. And the idea would be here, how can we generate automatically a documentary? This is a type of storytelling, and in the molecular domain, because David and the other people have been very good in rendering large models very fast. And what you see here is one example. On the left side, you see this textual description. This text is parsed, and automatically you are generating here a documentary. It's not as good as if somebody would do that manually, but good enough. And if the story changes, automatically the molecumentary is updated. You could write great books to explain and educate what is done in science, but here you get gorgeous graphics. David Goodsell, he's very known for these very nice illustrations. But then he was telling, whenever I'm finished with my illustration, it's already outdated. So the idea would be, can we produce something where new knowledge in science can be translated directly also in the dissemination? The other thing is you could come up with animations. Great, students are learning from that. But it takes very long to generate that. You need specialists, somebody has to author the story and so on. And the model commentary shall be a scalable documentary. So storytelling that you take scientific content and again automatically, procedurally generate a documentary out of it. It's the same as before, calculate instead of store. Not storing something that you produced in an elaborate process and it's outdated, but do it in real time. So the idea would be, instead of rendering, there's real-time visualization. It has to be fast enough. Then instead of authoring the transition, it should be automatically in a way. So this is automated exploration. And then we would like to add sound. But the sound can be producing voiceover is very costly. You need an experienced speaker and so on. But there are now the systems where you can have this text to sound calculated automatically. And if your storyboard changes with this text to sound, this is not a problem. So you have this synthetic commentary, real-time visualization, and an automatic camera, and then you get this automatic documentary. I'm not going too much into the details. There are two phases. The first is building up the story, and this is stored in a graph, and the graph structure has the structural information, which components belong to each other, are nested into each other, are close to each other. Then the second one would be that for each of these nodes, maybe you have links to a protein database that tells you about the 3D structure. And then you also have textual descriptions locally or maybe from Wikipedia. And maybe you're adding other edges, a second type of edge that describe functional relationships. These components are interacting with each other, maybe from a metabolic pathway model or from textual descriptions by keyword matching, for example. So this would be the first part. It's the story graph foraging. The second part would be then this story graph is your database. How can I traverse that? And each traversal gives you a different story. And there are two ways how to do this. The first one would be an automatic one. And the automatic one starts at some nodes, and with some stochastic input, you are taking one of several possibilities. Like in a museum exhibit, you have the story graph, and repeatedly you are telling a little bit a different story. And from that, you get an order of the story elements, and then for the scene, it has to be a visual information, the 3D structure, the camera, how is the camera moving, occlusion handling, and so on. And then you get this timeline, and you do this rendering where the textual description is converted into a voiceover, and then you have the camera and the occlusion handling. The second part would be that you have a story input, like you take a Wikipedia page, and it is parsed automatically. You do a keyword matching, and that defines also your story. And then you get a narrative synthesis. So here we don't have sound, because these are two stories that are automatically derived from the story graph a little bit in a different way. And you see different structures are explained. Here you see the text that would be then converted into sound, for example. And this gives you then, it is explaining to you the individual structures and can be used in education. This one has sound. And if you look closely, here's your text. It is converted. The red part here is the one that is currently transferred into this visual representation.
This model includes an HIV-1 variant, capturing the virus as it is ready to infect cells in the immune system. The virus is surrounded by blood plasma. The model is built with CellPack, integrating many sources of information from structural biology and microscopy. The virus is surrounded by membrane. Several envelope proteins are embedded in the membrane. GP120, one of them, capsid protein assembles into a hexamer, which further assembles into a large cone-shaped capsid. The capsid protects the genome of
So I guess you got the message. The idea would be, there's a framework. scientists are working on their model, are exploring it, and at the same time it's possible to get a documentary out there that maybe university students can then use. It's using the audio track for descriptions, and the documentary that you get out of it has a lot of limitations. It's an initial step, but it's automatic, and if you change the story, like the Wikipedia page, automatically you get a video of the updated story. So this is the basic message here. It's about you have the interaction on the scientist side, and on the dissemination side, you automatically generate the video. The next one, example from the past, will be about visual analysis. When are you doing a visual analysis? You're doing it if you don't know everything. I mean, God does not do an analysis or a visual analysis. He knows everything. It doesn't need to do. But many other people have an incomplete information. They are unsure about various components. They want to investigate variance, for example. So a key component in a visual analysis is uncertainty. And this has been talked about in many ways, and there have been techniques proposed how to show the uncertainty. It's difficult. But some people were saying that this is really important. What is not surrounded by uncertainty cannot be the truth. Richard Feynman, who knows this person? Very famous physicist, and he became also well known for his Feynman diagrams. He was doing visualization and showing processes in physics. Or Mr. Churchill, true genius resides in the capacity for evaluation of uncertain, hazardous, and conflicting information. How can you do decision making if you don't know all the information? And Mr. Voltaire, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is absurd. He was a really intelligent guy. As a person on the private level, he supposedly was not very nice. But this is a different story. So now I want to give you an example about how this uncertainty can be included in the decision-making process. And this is called fuzzy spreadsheet. It's a story by itself. The idea was lying around for a long time, and finally Vashali Danoa and the colleagues in the group of Mark Streit came along and realized that. And what is it about? Spreadsheet is a planning tool that many people know, but if you look at a spreadsheet, it's over-precise. I mean, you look at these individual cells, and they have one number. And you have now the numbers for the conference in the last 2 years, and you're supposed to do a planning for this year. You're not so sure about. Maybe the sponsors is the average of the last 2 years, or maybe that does not work. Maybe it would be better that you could calculate with intervals, with distributions. And that's basically what this is about. Maybe you can include in your planning this uncertainty, the one in a probability. How probable is this that this will be an online event or an on-site event? So you can have here a probability, but even if an event is happening, you're not sure about the value. I mean, the cost, you don't know how the prices are increasing, for example. Maybe you take a distribution here and talk about the standard variation. And what the fuzzy spreadsheet is, the idea is take the usual look and feel of a spreadsheet and augment it just a little bit with information that captures this uncertainty. And that's what is done here. And I will quickly talk about the individual components. And then you have a side panel. Here in this cell, you only get a minimalistic augmentation. And if you would really like to look closely, you have a side panel where you can look at distributions, for example. So what you might do is, with a traditional spreadsheet, you change the values and look how the overall balance is changing and hopefully positive. But then, as soon as you change the entry of a cell, you have to remember the old entry, you have to remember the old outcome, so this is rather cumbersome. What you could do is you take 3 spreadsheets. You're taking the worst case, the average case, the best case, for example. Also quite cumbersome, you have to keep it consistent in a way. Or what our goal was, these fuzzy spreadsheets, how can we capture this uncertainty? And whatever we are doing, the phenomenon can have a very localized effect, just on one point, a local one or a global one. And a spreadsheet is giving you a very precise, on-the-point view on the situation. And we would like to provide a little bit a local view on that. And so the first thing it's included in Excel. You start, initialize it, but what you're doing is you're defining a reference cell. So this is the one cell which in relation to the other cell, you would like to know what is happening. And so you have a reference cell, and then you can browse the sheet, and you have a focus cell, and then the focus cell tells you what is going on. You have in a spreadsheet a computational model behind that is encoded in these cell references. I'm adding up these 3 items and then get this one. But you don't see that. I mean, you could go to a totally different representation to show this computational graph, but that's not what we wanted to do. The first thing was to show relations. And you could show you have this reference cell, and then you would like to show which other cells are influencing directly this cell. And that is then encoded in these diamond shapes, and depending on, in black means this is neighborhood 1. You could go to neighborhood 2 and 3 as well. So this locally gives you an impression of the neighborhood, and you immediately see which part have an influence of this reference cell. So this is the one aspect. The other one would be the impact. You would like to quickly see which cell has the largest impact on your reference cell, on your overall budget. And so in this case, well, we are still at the impact. No, with the impact. Yeah, so, sorry. The impact is in color here. We see these squares, and a dark red means a lot of negative influence. Dark blue means a lot of positive influence. And so at a glance, you immediately see which cell has the largest impact on your outcome. The next one would be the probability. How likely is it that an event is happening? For the online registration, offline registration, is it a hybrid event? Will it be purely online? So you have here a probability between 0 and 1, Bernoulli event, and then you can turn this on, and you see it in the size then of these squares. So if you have a large dark red square, this has a large impact on the result, and it is highly probable. The next one is the distribution. If you know it will be an online event, you know the costs will be tremendous. But how is the value distributed? So in this case, you can define a distribution, a uniform distribution that would be calculating with intervals. Interval arithmetics has been around for a long time. Or you can a normal distribution or other distribution. And in a heat map, you see here the distribution, and this gives you a localized view, not a point view, but a localized view. And on the side panel, you can explore that. And the last thing would be this what-if analysis, these variations. What happens if I change? I see here, this is red and large, highly probable. Maybe I can save some money in the cost here. I started the what-if analysis. I changed this value. And if I do this, then I immediately, in the cell, I get a second heat map, the red one. This is the variant. And you can immediately compare it. And here with this arrow, this indicates now the result has been improved. And you can take a look at the side panel as well. So you take a look at these distributions, and suddenly you find out that it is more on the positive side. So this is better for the balance. And I think it's not only that you know the average, the variance is also very important for the stability. So this was the basic strategy here. Take what the people know already and slightly augment it with uncertain information. So 3 examples. I could give more, but I was asked to talk about the future. This is not so easy. I mean, Kierkegaard said, life is lived forward and you are understood backwards. So what's the future? Maybe we come back to our proposition. I mean, revisit it. Do you have preferences? Shall we go through all? Women become uglier year after year. Who agrees to that? Yes, but also men become uglier and dumber year after year. And this is very natural. Don't worry if you think you're more stupid than last year. 200 years ago, when a girl was living in a small village, she had to compare to 10 other girls in her age group. And we know very well from statistics, if you have a small base group, it's easy to stand out, positively and also negatively. Nowadays, a girl has to compare to millions of other girls, temporally and spatially distributed all over the world. She has to compare to people that are photoshopped. She has to compare to people that do not exist. They are generated automatically. So this proposition is basically about comparative visualization, scalable visualization. How far do I take my base set where I do the comparison? How far does it make sense? And this is increasingly nowadays very difficult and very important. And so this proposition is a different formulation of this scalability issue in my story triangle. And I did a brainstorming with myself, and it's not good if you talk to yourself for too long. And I have come up with many examples that might be interesting for future work. I can give you the slides if you ask me and pay. Here the story triangle is dissolving. It's not even a storyline anymore. It's story points, story dots. And I do subsampling, and I selected a few. Guess how many? 3. That I think will be interesting in the future. And nowadays, many people are talking about a digital twin. Who likes digital twins? Thank you, Dieter. I have to disappoint you. There's one thing with digital twins: they don't exist, and they will never exist. Imagine if you're sitting around, you're sleepy, and nothing's. But what's going on in a nanosecond in your body? There's so many things going on. It's not possible that you will have one digital twin that is capturing yourself. You will have many. This is the scalability issue. You will have many twinlets. I call them twinlets. You will have a digital twin that is mimicking your kidney. Then you have a digital twin mimicking your shoulder. Then you have a digital twin simulating their social behavior. You will have hundreds of these digital twins. I like triplets. That would be 3, but there will be many more. And this makes the thing really messy. How can you accommodate those? They are contradicting each other. Maybe they are dying. Maybe they are overlapping. They are contradicting. And this is there are initiatives out there. People are talking about data fabrics. What the previous speakers were talking about. You have so many different data sources. How can you accommodate those? How can you make defensible statements if the data stream is not available anymore, or you don't have access to that, or cross-domain fusion? So that's all about. In the past you had islands of data. They are growing together now, and how can you cope with that? And that I call future data. I try to coin new terms. And the key observation is the digital world is finite. You might not believe it, but the digital world is finite, and that has a lot of consequences. And we are complaining about dynamic data nowadays, but we have to bring data to life. And that's the data biomimicry. That's, can we take principles of nature, of biological systems, and apply them to the digital world? The one key element is adaptivity. Like biological systems, use it or lose it. So if you have an interface or a visualization system and you are using not a certain functionality, it's going away. It's getting smaller. It's vanishing, for example. Or if one data stream is always the outlier in your weather prediction, why take that stream? Maybe it's going away slowly. And in manufacturing, you have this phenomena: you produce and then you use it. You produce a car and then you use it. You cannot drive a half-finished car, but in nature, it's a combination, produce. I mean, the data is growing up. What does growing up, educating the data mean? It's data curation. It's a very messy, complicated process. But you cannot wait until the data is finished. It will never be. You have to make the best out of the data. And maybe during this process, if the data is not fully grown up, you have to a certificate, a quality seal that tells you how reliable is this. And I think this is also very, very necessary. Data garbage, data recycling. I mean, there's so much data lying around. It's curated for a certain period. It's still valuable. Maybe, how can we do this? But then, how can it be repurposed? So probably you need some pre and post condition, how that can be done. And the death, I like death. How can the data die? I mean, some people are saying the internet is never forgetting. But I think it would be a very interesting project to research that the data is dying. What does this mean? Data has a scope, and then it's lying around. But nowadays, an image does not have any legal value. You can fake it so much, or a video. And so it could be, maybe through experts, blockchain technology, whatever, the data has an expiration date. And after this expiration date, it's dead. I mean, it might be ghosting around. It might be still around, but it's not taken seriously anymore. And I think that can have, with privacy and all that, that can have far-flung, interesting consequences. Imagine all these autonomous driving cars. They are capturing Internet of Things, capturing so much data. Why should we store that? We would drown in data. Somebody was saying a crisis develops if the old is dying and the young cannot be born. I think it's even worse. It's worse if the old is not dying and the young cannot be born. But then if the data is dead, what do you keep from the data? Remembrance. Like if you're in data streaming processing, you cannot keep the data, it's too much. But what you keep is maybe some aggregated information, and that can be helpful. Because we must come to a state where you can still make some statements. I found out this and that, and I used some data, and the data is not available anymore, and still this statement is valid. Yeah, I'm talking too much. Tells me that I have nothing to say at home. But this data biomimicry has its limit. I mean, if you're sitting in an Airbus A380 and the wings, the huge wings, start to flap wildly and widely, then you should be worried. So then it's not about that the airplane is coming to life, it's about that death. So, okay, very many interesting topics, other one as well. So let's go back to the other proposition. The former and future president of the US has been right. There was all this talking about America first. I think globalization in the last 30 years has gone too far. If you take a dynamical system and you reduce friction, then the system is becoming unstable. And stability is resilience is what we are talking about. So this was the first thing. I mean, I would formulate it a little bit different like the president. I would say Burgenland first, because I'm from Burgenland. But for this proposition, I think the second part, people were saying he was lying all the time, and he came along with a lot of these fake news. But fake news are good news. In a way, bad news are traveling faster and farther. And that's not in the nature of the bad news, it's in the nature of humans. We are constantly worrying. And this is about storytelling. And therefore, it will fit into our story triangle. But then, science is strange as well. I mean, nowadays you have so many different explanations, and one is from science and the other one are from other people. Science is really strange. I will give you 3 examples. Einstein, so not from me, if an idea doesn't seem absurd at first, then it is no good. Vaccination horror story. That's not about the current pandemic. Does anybody know where the term vaccination is coming from? It contains vacca. Vacca is Latin for cow. And 200 years ago, Edward Jenner had made an observation. Smallpox has been a terrible disease, and there was also cowpox around. And he made the observation that milkmaids that were in contact with cows that had cowpox became less often smallpox. And from this observation, he wanted to test it. So he took, imagine an ethics commission nowadays, how they would rate that. He took from the sore of a sick milkmaid, he took some material and injected it into a kid. He was not so sure if his strategy would work because he didn't take his son, but the son of his gardener. But it worked out. And a couple of weeks later, he exposed repeatedly the gardener's son to smallpox, and he didn't become sick. Imagine propose something to parents of a small kid nowadays. Anyway, so at the beginning, what people are doing can seem overly absurd in a way. And I'm coming from computer graphics. And this is faking at its best. There have been hundreds of engineers that dedicated all their effort to come up with GPUs that were really great in texture mapping, in faking the surface of objects, for example. And now they are using these GPUs for machine learning to great extent. Repeatedly, some people have been talking about, and Dieter Schmalzig is sitting here, about augmented and virtual reality. This is faking. This is pure faking. But how can science tell the better story? How can science tell and show the better story? And so this proposition, the American president, very well fits into this interactive narrative vertex of the story. The future of storytelling, and I think Anders will give a much better explanation later on. The only difference that we have, science, that I see compared to what other people are proposing is science has the better explanations. We need to communicate them. So, who knows Immanuel Kant? Personally, I guess. He was talking about das Ding an sich, the thing by itself. So, and the physical phenomena, but you cannot know this physical phenomena. You can only watch it, you can sense it, you can perceive it. It's unknown. And so, when we have an explanation, we are approximating the underlying phenomena. And then here we have this H triangle of this truth proximity. A story can be helpful, harmful, or hideous. Hideous is malicious. And that depends on the intent. And the intent can be good, bad, or wrong. And your story might look like a wrong one, for example, but we have to provide the explanation. And this is leads me back to the example, the molecular example. You have this story graph. But in the future, we will have to augment this story graph much more. Each node is corresponding to a concept, but we need this concept on many different levels. Down to the most detailed level, Edward Dufty was saying, above all else, show the original data. But then for a story for other audiences, you might have it on a higher level. So there, in each node, you have different levels concerning the content, different levels concerning the visual representations, different levels concerning how you tell the story. You can tell the story very tersely, very briefly in an allegory, for example. And so the story graph has to get much larger. I think I had discussion with Peter Mindek and Peter Rautek about this, and nothing came out of it. So I think this would make a really great basic research proposal. Anyway, and after you have that, you traverse this story. And I have here three points that I consider interesting. The first is the unity of knowledge, discovery, and dissemination. Anders will talk about that. The Humboldt. Who knows the Humboldt brothers? Alexander was, he was traveling around. He managed that a penguin, an ocean current, and a volcano is named after him. But he had an older brother, the Wilhelm. And Wilhelm was reorganizing the university system, and then he was talking about the unity of research and teaching. But that was on the university level, and I think nowadays we have to go on this unity of knowledge, discovery, and dissemination. And this has to be done automatically, because in the past, you did some science, and then you had to report it to the public audience, and you didn't like it. It was hindering you from doing research. This has to be done automatically. This is related to visualization literacy. I mean, how can people interpret what they see? At the last VRVis conference, there was a cool capstone talk by a historian, and he was talking about Galileo, and Galileo with his telescope was looking at the Jupiter moons, and of these shadow lines, he could derive the 3D structures of the moon. And then the speaker made the case that Galileo had a uprising education. He knew he had an artistic education. He knew the new way of painting. And finally, what he said, his contemporaries were looking, but only Galileo could see. And so I think there's people working on this visualization literacy. We are far away from that. Alex Lex from Utah, for example, is doing great work there. But the last one is really key. We need transparency. So this knowledge graph, story graph, has to be open. It has to be accessible to everybody. And there should be a quality control. That at each of these levels, somebody is saying, yeah, I agree to that. It can be a ranking. It can be a rating. It can be experts giving the seal of approval. Whatever. I mean, like we do in scientific publishing, when we have this review system. So that the story path, if you then traverse this and generate a narration, at each step you need to have a quality measure that you have to show that tells you that this might closely approximate reality. So, and I think that's how it shall be. But I guess many of you came across this ChatGPT frenzy right now. I mean, this is this AI system that came along only 2 months ago, and now universities are talking about how can we change our teaching. Does it make any sense to make a high school assignment, to assign a student an essay if this system is producing it quickly? I don't know, it can be disruptive. But what I want to say here, this unity of knowledge discovery and dissemination, it means why should you write papers anymore? I had a conversation with Harald Bieringer, who has the Whistleblower spin-off of VRVis, and he was saying it's difficult to sell interactive systems. The market would like to have automatic one. And then he says automatic reporting would be really great. But why would you in the future as a scientist write reports anymore? You start out with a mind map. I mean, this mind map is your story graph, and this mind map is structuring your research ideas. And as soon as you are finished, you press a button, and then a project proposal is automatically generated for review. And if you do interdisciplinary research, maybe you're generating 2 project proposals, one for the domain expert, one for the computer scientist. I think what I didn't mention, you also have to include here in the notes the pre-knowledge of what people know. This can you capture in a museum exhibit. The kids are playing a game, and from that you derive their pre-knowledge, and then you know on which level you can tell the story there. Then you do your research, and you augment your mind map, and as soon as you are finished, you press a button, and the scientific paper is produced. Why would you pay a researcher for wordsmithing? These guys should come up with new ideas. And you have to do a reporting for the funding agency, for the public. That shall be done automatically. And if you change your research graph, automatically there's a video produced for the general public, a video for kids. Large challenges for provenance. How can I show what has been changed? How can I convey that my statements are still valid? So I'm way too long talking about that, but I think this can be a nice development. Future directions in this interactive narrative way. I again selected 3 topics. I will talk about none of those, so because of time requirements. So this is the vanishing triangle. I have to tell you, what I don't tell you is actually the most beautiful part of my talk. Let's go to the 3rd proposition. You want to hear the 3rd proposition? It's always difficult, dangerous to ask people. Crimea belongs to Russia. If you look, this is a very rough timeline about historic events. Approximative, it's distorted, but I didn't have more time. So if you do, and this is again about certainty, uncertainty, how large are you taking a look at the information? If your probing is very precise, well, you might get a decent answer. So if you are probing with an interval, you're unsure, like the fuzzy spreadsheet example, well, the outcome might not be so clear anymore. Maybe if you make your range even larger, the outcome is becoming even more uncertain and unsure. But even if you make a probing here, there might be contradicting opinions with horrible consequences that we see now. So this proposition basically relates to how can we visually reason better with these uncertainties. And so this relates back to this vision analysis corner of the story where uncertainty is key. We have learned to calculate with uncertainties. That's what statistics is doing. We have learned to calculate with unknowns. That's what algebra is doing. But people are notoriously bad in reasoning with uncertainties. I have friends in the pandemic, they were telling me, yeah, I understand that getting a vaccination might make sense. And then I know this one person, and this one person had problems. So this, this one case fallacy where you're generalizing that. So this proposition relates to and I had again many examples about this. I selected 3, and I will talk about one. This is the self-explanatory AI because that's affecting me a lot. Uncertainty means that some information is missing. Maybe you don't know something about a system, you need help. And recently, there was a talk by Ben Schneiderman. He's this user interface expert. And what he was saying is user interfaces have to become self-explanatory, not explainable. Everybody's talking about explainable AI. That's not enough. The system has to become self-explanatory. And that relates also to visual analysis, to our systems. And let me give you an example. I'm taking negative examples because negative examples are traveling faster and further. This is the recording system at our university when you give a lecture in the lecture room, and you can turn on the streaming, but here the interface is trying very hard to convey what it is. So it shows a button, and you have to press the button, and then the streaming might be on or off. Well, who knows? Then in an incremental design, somebody added, I like it, it's going in the right direction, it's self-explanatory. Streaming on, off, not quite there. Stream active is white. And, active might be on or off, the stream related to stream. Anyway, a good example. A second example that is horribly without visuals. I like visualizations. This example shall show you these automatic systems will come much more into our life, but they have to behave properly. And right now, these automatic systems are not behaving properly. I have a small-scale employment in Norway, University of Bergen, for 17 years. I pay taxes there, and suddenly I get an email in Norwegian, and it tells me I need a tax card. My employer tried to get one, and I should log in and get me and order a tax card. Did I ever have a tax card for the last 17 years? Do I need one? What are the consequences? Why don't I have a tax card now? I was at a great loss. I mean, this is an automatic system, and if it's automatic, it could include a couple of links. So how can I solve that? I'm an old school person. I was contacting an NI, a natural intelligence. I was talking to Aaron Kovac from our group and said, Aaron, I need tax cards. Can you help me? And then Aaron said, yeah, sure. He's a new school guy. He likes artificial intelligence. He took the liberty to translate this into English because these AI systems are more fluent in English. The translation system said that this is Swedish, but it's not. And then the second liberty that he took is he replaced my name by a picture of me. He was thinking I need a picture ID. And that's what came out of it. And I think the Norwegian Tax Authority will like that. What worries me a little bit is, if you look at this mad dog expression, Renata Reido from our group is often saying to me, you are a grumpy old man. And, well, I didn't care. I mean, it was Renata saying that. But I have the... What worries me now is that the AI system has the same opinion like Renata. Then I came up with a conspiracy theory that says that probably Renata was training the system. Do you know the conspiracy triangle? I mean, if you wanna, has anybody come up with a conspiracy story? You should. It's great. It's again a triangle. Nothing happens by chance. Everything is interconnected, and nothing is what it looks like. So if your story follows these three principles, you're doing fine. So one more remark. These automatic systems are great. They will be good for our life, but they have to behave. And if somebody is approaching you and telling you, shut up, don't talk back, I'm now talking to you, this is not a proper behavior. And if you look at this email, the first thing is this email, no reply. It is self-explanatory. I understand now what the automatic system wants. It wants that I shut up. But don't let this allow you. So, okay, I'm almost at the end. So, basically, what I wanted to tell you, I had a story, but there were two narratives on two different levels. This one level was sort of on the educated level for people that know visual computing in a way, and it was about scalable interactive visual analysis. And here I had this tabloid type of story that was about women, President, Crimea. And if you look, there's an axis between. On the left side, you have more like a rational prevailing. On the other side, you have emotion. But to tell a story, emotions are also very important. I mean, if you want to get an engagement from kids, you need to involve emotions in a way. So, is this the end? No. For an hour, I tried now to convey to you everything three. I mean, I have 3 co-speakers. I'm giving the talk around 3 o'clock, approximately. I gave 3 examples from the past, 3 examples from the future. There must be a third story, like the third man must be hiding somewhere. And this is the third story. It's the JGE story. I mentioned it in the title of my talk. Did anybody recognize that my title was Scalable Interactive Visual Analysis -JGE? Yeah, now you're saying that. Anyway, I don't have enough time to talk about that. And that's the just good enough triangle. This is a story that is larger than the other twos. Very nice. It's a very old principle that we are using, like in simulation, wherever. But nowadays, with our new situation, I have the feeling that data and our situation is melting in a way. We have climate change in our digital world. And now that we have fluids, data fluids, user fluids, how many user groups you have there, you have to apply this just good enough in a different way. I had a story there as an allegory. An allegory is a very condensed, high-level story, but I will not tell you. Basically, Leonardo da Vinci has been mentioned, a terrible guy. I mean, his foresightedness has been incredible. The eye is blind, what the mind does not see. And in all this, what we are doing here, visual computing, visual analysis will make us see. So I think the problems are so varied that the future for visual computing is nice. I think that's what I wanted to tell you.
So Eddie, thank you for this great talk, scalable talk. Are there some questions? Tito.
Hello. Thank you for this great talk. So George Orwell, in his novel 1984, is already presenting automatic story generation for the masses, you know, many decades before this time now. But then the machine only has 6 different templates for the stories, and they're very repetitive. I wonder if you could comment on this aspect.
Thank you, Dieter. I think there are many other people that are working on storytelling. There are books on it, and there are very many different ways how to tell stories. I think there are many more than 6 templates out there. You can, like in religion, for example, this parable, allegory, this is a very condensed one. When you look in literature, Shakespeare, for example, you have 5 acts that are also reflected in it. I think the storytelling community out there is talking about many of these various templates, I would say. And but what I consider really important is that at each level of your story there should be a quality seal, that you in a way have a feeling how close approximate it is to the truth. I don't know if this answers the question.
Okay, do we have some more questions?
Hi, I actually have 2 questions. The first one is, well, clearly you like triangles and the number 3, but I'm curious, why do you think that this organization in 3 dimensions is really good? Is it just like 2 is not enough, 4 is too much, and 3 is just good enough? Or like, why does this work and that you use it so much, this triangle? And the second question is about like the storytelling parts too. All this story generation and automatic generation of content and explanation of research and discovery. Don't you think that still there's a challenge of all this requires attention and engagement in the part of the user, and now attention is like a very hard resource to get? Like there's so much things competing for people's attention and time, and even if you have a lot of very good scientific stories around, like how are people really going to spend their time absorbing this?
Thank you for the questions. I think 3 is just good enough. You know, with 2, it's with 3 you have the feeling it's much more. So and I think triangles are at the base of all our existence and thinking. So that's the 3. And the other one, sure, there are so many things that are fighting for our attention. And I said the world is finite, and also the digital world is finite. And what we have now is there are so many wrong and hideous stories out there, and maybe fewer that are approximating the truth. So I think we have to find ways that we get more attention for our stories. And then it's a typical competition. I mean, you take kids in the museum and they will immediately select those stories that they like the most. And it's sure there's a danger. I mean, if you have the possibility automatically to generate 10, 15 stories, that you are flooded and that you are over-personalizing things. I had it there. I mean, some systems are talking about make everything personal. But this is also a weakness of our society, Western liberal society, that everybody's living in our own bubble, and we have to get out of this bubble. And so I think if we can have these stories, and the difference, not the end might be absurd, but that we can convey some other people were looking at it, checking in it, and it's sort of approximating the truth in a positive way. Then I think. That's a good thing. And we have to compete for attention anyway, because the other guys are providing their strange stories in large numbers anyway.
Okay, here's another question.
Thank you, Eddie, for inspiration. There are 5 types of uncertainty from the mathematical point of view. And I am curious about your visualization of contradictions, or this was not commented.
And on some slide there was a term visualizing contradiction visualization.
Yes, in this aspect it is named strife when you have 2 contradictory facts. So please, could you give some visual example?
Well, I mean, if you look at the phenomenon on several scales, then you have very many models on these individual scales, and every model has a scope. The scope means where it is closer to truth and less, and usually at the border of this scope, these models are getting less and less accurate. And then you have another model that is taking over. You could have, with these biological structures, compartment models that gives you the density, and you know the density of a certain structure, and then you have the individual elements. And so in these ranges you have contradicting information, and how can you show that? And this is a little bit different than from incomplete information. Or if you look back in history, or Marie Paul, I think this paleontology example is a nice example. Maybe you have several explanations there that are supported by various different evidences, but they contradict each other. How are you going to show that? Are you showing that in sequence? Are you showing the most probable one? Are you showing it with giving an indication that there are alternative explanations? That's also the story graph that has to be accommodated. Sometimes you have in science competing theories, and it's not yet sure which one will prevail. And you cannot just say, I take one of that. I don't know in which situation how to show it, but that's a nice way. And this contradiction visualization has not been explored good enough, I would say. I would say so, yes.
Meister, I really enjoyed your talk. I'm wondering, you were talking about scalable authoring of stories, but if you have this tool, you will end up in a lot of stories, a lot of content in form of reports for funding agencies, for papers, and so on. But at some point, we need also a scalable consumption. And I'm wondering, how do you see that end of the scalability?
Yeah, you know, in the past it was producing a paper was really costly, printing it and shipping it. And nowadays it's much the cost is much lower. And on the other side, you have somebody that has to consume that. That's an interesting thing because certain phenomena don't scale, like how many papers you can consume, for example. So, but maybe then it would be possible that these systems are generating a state-of-the-art report, a summary for you that corresponds to your attention span. And that is all. If you have a finite world, and humans are most of are finite, then you have to do some optimization, and then you know I only have a certain amount of resources, and sometimes I get a book, but that's too much. I cannot read this book. But I would like to have a short story, just to get the high-level explanation of a new concept, and maybe later on I'm interested in more detail. So I think that having many more stories might actually be helpful to tailor this to my, as consumer, to my needs and to my resources that I have available.
Okay, we're running out of time. Maybe one more question. Yeah, Katja, please.
So we should do a comparison of ugly women and men. I invite you to take a photo afterwards. so yeah, but that was just a side comment. No, I wonder about the really wonderful visualizations and the storytelling on the molecules. Yeah, and on the viruses. So I wondered, I mean, currently I think it's all rule-based, your storytelling, so the mapping from the text to the model. I mean, do you see a possibility to have that also later on in a learned way, so using some AI deep learning technique that's from the text to the model? And on the other hand, also vice versa. So, I mean, having a visualization and generating automatically an explanatory text out of it.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question. On one of the slides, I had this correspondence between visual and text interfaces. And I think this is very much a very interesting domain. This molecumentary was showing sort of the one way you have the text and then how to produce visuals. But if you have a medical doctor, he has images and has to do an automatic reporting by having a very brief description of what he has seen. I think the other way around is also equally interesting. And sure, artificial intelligent systems will help in all these ways. It can also, the storyboard, who is producing the storyboard? Right now you take a Wikipedia page, but maybe you could take some other information. And in very many, I think, in very many steps, you can include artificial intelligence. And the other one was, the other question,
That was, I mean, from text to...
Oh, the other way around. Yeah, I talked about the other way around.
That was rule-based at the moment, and there was the question deep learning, and the other way around from the visualization to the text. I mean, this comes with many additional questions, how to ensure that the explanation is correct. I mean, we have seen now that the models are producing some not so reliable answers, but I think it's...
The general, in the topics I told about, this instant construction and the model commentary is compute instead of store. But compute can be any type of, it can be a simulation, it can be a model, it can be the result of that you apply artificial intelligence, for example. So, but the general principle is that in a semi-automatic way, you are regenerating and including new knowledge that you have and that you don't have to do it manually. And I think I had one topic, it's called quantitative visualization, and that's also about interaction. I would like to browse, or very much what Marie-Paul was talking about, a brush, a semantic brush, a brush that is selecting 5% of the data, or that you use some machine learning, and if locally your point set in a scatter plot is elongated, then you are selecting that. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so thank you again, Edie, for this correct talk. Yeah, and we will see us again at 3:15. And there's again this number, 3.
3 is every, I mean, it's just 3. Yeah.
Okay, so we will now have the coffee break, and we will see us again later. Thank you.